Hello, and welcome back to Pat Psychology Masters. In last week's episode, I talked about the self concept. What is your view of yourself? And the information in that video will largely provide the foundation for this week's. So if you haven't watched it, make sure to watch it first. Today I'm going to be talking about self-construal, which is how we view the self. Understandably, the self-concept and self-construal are linked. One is what and the other is how. Now, in today's episode, I'm going to reference some kind of Western and Eastern philosophies and how the Western philosophy of self kind of dominated psychological research, particularly up until 1991. Now, in 1991, Marcus and Kitayama released a landmark paper describing how in the East there is a much more collectivist view of the self, and in the West there is a much more individualistic view of the self. Now, what are these perspectives on the self? How does an individualistic person see themselves? Well, an individualistic view of the self sees the person as autonomous, as unique, as abstracted from the social environment. Let me elaborate on that last point just for a moment. So, to be extracted from the social environment means that you are yourself. It doesn't matter whether you're at work or whether you're with your friends or whether you're with your family. There is a consistent self across these different domains. So there is no real professional Pat and social Pat and family Pat. Pat is the same in each situation. He might do different things, but he's the same person. Now, if the individualistic view of the self is on one end of the spectrum, the collectivist view of the self might be on the other end of the spectrum. So, a collectivistic view of the self would be one that sees the self as embedded in a social context. One where you're defined by your social roles and your social position. So, the individualistic view of the self sees the person as reducible to that person. But the collectivist view of the self, you are reduced to your social network or what particular social network you might find yourself in. So you can't necessarily be reduced to a single person. Yourself is embedded in that social network. So you have your position at work, and that position at work dictates your view of yourself. You have your position in your family, and that position dictates that view of yourself somewhat. And they might be somewhat divergent, and that's okay. That's not something pathological. And it's interesting because the Western view of the self sees consistency as an extremely important variable. And we can see this idea of the virtue of consistency kind of be pervasive across Western academia for a long time. If you look at the theories of attitude change and theories of relationship formation, you'll see that consistency plays an extremely important role in all these types of theory. But maybe this is just a Western view of the self. Maybe this isn't the view of the self that we see in Eastern cultures. And that's exactly the case. And I found it fascinating. Let me begin by describing why consistency mightn't always be a good thing. Look at compliance techniques. So a compliance technique would be a way in which a person might manipulate another person to comply, to do what they want to do. And we see this in marketing and in sales all the time. Let's say a salesperson comes to your door and wants to sell you a phone plan. They might employ what's called the foot in the door tactic. So they might tell you, Pat, we've got a brilliant phone plan for you. It's only €5 a month. It's half what you're paying at the moment. Doesn't make any sense not to join up. And I might say, yeah, absolutely. You're right. It doesn't make any sense not to sign up. Sign me up. Right? Let me put my name somewhere. I want to get a hold of this deal. And just as I'm about to sign my name on the contract, the salesperson might say, brilliant. Now, just so you know, it's a 24-month contract. Boom. The door has been blown wide open. That €5 a month foot in the door had a big 24-month contract come behind it to blow the door open. And what the salesperson is doing is trying to take advantage of what he hopes is my consistency. Now, if I'm behaving consistently with my desires to avail of this plan, I might sign up to the 24-month plan. And I probably will. Because €5 a month is a good deal. And look, €5 a month is still €5 a month, even if it's for 24 months. Now, that salesperson has just secured a customer for 2 years. Brilliant for him. Not so amazing for me if 12 months down the line I find a phone plan that's only €2.50. But I'd have been locked into a contract. Another example of a compliance technique that takes advantage of a person's consistency is a lowballing technique. A different salesperson comes to the door and says, Pat, I have an amazing subscription deal for you. Cancel your Netflix. This is only a €5 a month and we've got more shows. €5 a month for more shows? Happy days. Sign me up. I'm about to sign up and the person informs me, listen, Pat, there is an upfront charge for our special box of €100. But once you spent that €100 for the box, your sign-up fee is sorted and you'll get it for €5 a month from then on. Here I am. I want my €5 a month deal and there's a €100 sign-up fee. Oh, look, it's €100 to get the deal that I want. I want to behave consistently. Look, I want to be consistent with my initial opinion, with my initial inclination to take this offer, and I'm going to pay the sign-up fee. That salesperson has just lowballed me. They've hit me with an offer that had a low charge, was very appealing, and much like the foot in the door technique, they've got me with an upfront cost. They've just made €100 more than I was initially willing to spend in that first transaction. Now, interestingly, we find in more collectivist cultures, people are less susceptible to these compliance techniques. So, inconsistency mightn't be such a bad thing after all. Now, let me just rephrase what I described there as inconsistency. You could describe inconsistency as the ability to appropriately modulate one's behaviour given a certain situation. Sounds less like inconsistency then, doesn't it? If behaving a particular way at work benefits your work life more than behaving in that particular way would, let's say, in your home life or in your social life, why is that such a bad thing? It's basically an idea that we've created in Western culture, but it's not there in Eastern culture. Further research from Su in 2002, now I hope I'm pronouncing that researcher's name correctly, is Su recruited participants in North America, and he described a hypothetical person as being very consistent across their relationships, and asked the participants what their opinion of this hypothetical person was. The participants thought of the person as somebody as highly skilled and very likeable. They're consistent across all their relationships. Great, that sounds like a person I'm going to get on with. And it takes skill to do that, so yeah, I like them. Now, Su also recruited some Korean participants and did not find the same results at all. So that virtue of consistency is not a universal one, and that shocked me. I thought it was fascinating because I place a lot of importance on consistency in my own life, and it just had me question, well, what's the utility of that? Why? I've neglected to mention a third way of construing the self. I've talked about both ends of the spectrum. We have the individualistic and we have the collectivist. What would you describe somebody who's in the middle? Well, Cross, Morris and Gore in their 2003 paper described that hypothetical person as somebody with a relational self-construal. So they don't see themselves as totally independent from others, but they don't see themselves embedded in quite a large social network. They see themselves as being particularly close or identifying with a few or maybe even one person, be it a partner or a best friend or perhaps a sibling. For people with a relational self-construal, their well-being is somewhat contingent on the well-being of those they are particularly close to. So, for them to thrive, they need to see others to thrive. So it's quite like collectivist and it's quite like individualistic, but it's not quite exactly like them. It's somewhat of a mix between the two. And we see this variation within cultures. Some people are more collectivist, some people are more individualistic, and some people are more relational. I love that we have that diversity. I see myself as probably somewhere in the middle, in the relational construal. Where do you see yourself? I'd love for you to let me know in the comments. Now, as I was reading this literature, I found myself thinking about the philosophical ideas of free will and determinism. And I thought to myself that I think a lot of people in Western cultures, on my limited experience, place a lot of faith in the idea of free will, of the uniqueness and freedom of the individual. And in Eastern cultures, there's the contrary to that. There seems to be a more prominent idea of determinism, of things being somewhat out of your control, of maybe a greater will at force that's outside of just the individual. I like to call it as quite a harmonious determinism. So, determinism doesn't have to be a bad thing. Consistency doesn't have to be a good thing. It just depends on how you put them into practice and how you put them into view. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on the free will and determinism debate and how it may or may not apply to construal. Make sure to let me know in the comments. And lastly, I'd like to just point out that the research I've referenced was conducted quite a while ago now. In 1991, Marcus and Kitayama, we had Su in 2002, and we had Cross, Morris and Gore in 2003. Maybe things are changing. In the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of globalization. The boundary between East and West has been blurred. In the West, we see the growing popularization of things like meditation and Buddhism. And in the East, we see the growing popularization of capitalism. So perhaps these values are changing. Perhaps the world is becoming a bit more homogenous. What do you reckon? Now, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button and that bell icon to get notified for next week's video, because I'm going to be talking about another fascinating topic, which is on the neuroscience of morality. If you're already subscribed, let me know what you thought of the video in the comments. Perhaps there's a topic you'd like me to cover in a future video. Maybe there's something you really disagreed with. I'd love to hear from you. Lastly, if any of your friends sprung to mind when you were watching this video, share it with them. They'd love to know you're thinking of them, and I hope they'll find it interesting too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you here next week.